Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to participants and speakers who are joining us today. On behalf of the Micronutrient Forum and the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, GAIN, I am so pleased to welcome you to this webinar on hidden hunger. My name is Tanuja Rastogi, and I am the Director of Advocacy at the Forum. As we honor World Food Day, we have invited you today to discuss an important form of hunger called hidden hunger, which is a term often used to describe micronutrient deficiencies in critical vitamins and minerals that are necessary for human health and consumed in small or micro amounts. For years, and in this case decades, the actual number of people impacted by hidden hunger was not well understood. This changed last week with a seminal publication released in Lancet Global Health that reports new global estimates of micronutrient deficiencies. I am delighted today to convene an impressive group of leading experts, including authors of the new Lancet report, who work at the forefront of the fields of nutrition and micronutrient nutrition, to discuss the findings and understand what it means for communities all across the globe. We will also hear about opportunities and ways that we can turn the tide on hidden hunger and launch a new era supportive of micronutrient nutrition. And of course, we look forward to hearing from you, our participants today, particularly as there has been unprecedented interest in this report. Your comments and questions are welcome in the chat and Q&A box. A response team is working behind the scenes to answer your questions. First, before we begin, let me check off a few housekeeping notes. There is simultaneous French and Spanish interpretation for this session. You can simply click on the translation icon, interpretation at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And feel free to introduce yourself with your name, organization, and country in the chat. And please write your name and affiliation in your Zoom window. You can post questions as mentioned in the Q&A function and indicate who you would like to answer that question. For any technical difficulties, please send a direct message to tech support. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing afterwards. Now to our session. Our panel today will be followed by closing remarks by Dr. Saskia Osendorp, so stay tuned for that as she has a very important announcement. Now, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Mduduzi Mbuya, who is the Director of Knowledge Leadership with the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, where he is responsible for generating and using evidence to guide improved design and implementation of food systems programs. Dr. Mbuya, please, we welcome your opening remarks. Thank you.
Good day to you all. Thank you, Tanuja, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Mduduzi Mbuya, the Director of Knowledge Leadership at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and I would like to warmly welcome you all to this special event. I'm honored to make opening remarks at this launch of the new global estimates of micronutrient deficiencies that was published in the Lancet Global Health last week. And I thank you all for your interest in taking a deep dive into its key findings through an outstanding panel of experts here with us today, followed by what I hope will be a lively discussion. Now, my work in nutrition for the past 2 decades, and especially my formative work in my native Zimbabwe, has made me acutely aware of the effects of undernutrition. Part of my work involved interventions for communities that were desperately affected by hunger and undernutrition. First, as an intern in the Ministry of Health and Child Welfare, as it was called then, it was part of our job to understand the effects of hunger and support child supplementary feeding programs. Then when I joined the NGO sector, my focus shifted to training lay health workers and setting up community-based growth monitoring interventions. Another dimension of this work involved conducting anthropometric surveys to inform food assistance programs. There's a thread in these experiences. So while this was some years in the past, the focus on hunger still dominates national and global nutrition discourse even today. And this is for good reason, certainly. Hunger triggers an emotional response. It is associated with preventable loss of lives and livelihoods. It affects the socioeconomic development of communities, so certainly this focus is warranted. Now, we also track the number of people who go to bed hungry each night. We know, for example, that hunger has increased by about 46 million since 2020, according to the SOFI report, and 150 million since 2019. We track the numbers of children who suffer from wasting and underweight and target responses accordingly. But as we will hear from Dr. Osendorp shortly, what is colloquially referred to as hidden hunger is equally devastating. Despite having few identifiable symptoms, deficiencies of micronutrients can result in a compromised immune system, hinder normal human growth and development, and affect human economic potential worldwide. And one could argue that we can't mitigate or track progress of what we can't monitor or measure. So now for 30 years, scientists, program planners, policymakers, and funders have consistently referred to the figure of 2 billion to estimate the number of people suffering from this hidden hunger. It is widely cited in the academic and grey literature. I took a quick look at the literature last week, and this suggested to me that over 500 papers and reports have referenced this statistic in 2022 alone. So this signals a significant burden, but there are 2 significant problems with this estimate. First of all, it does not have a clear methodology underlying it, so we can't track progress. We can't update this estimate to see whether it has grown or diminished. Why does this matter? The world has experienced a sequence of public health and economic shocks recently. Through the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the current security and economic crises that are compounded by effects of climate change. Even here in the US, a high-income country, people are cutting back on meals due to the current crises. We know all these combined have negative effects, but we cannot update the prevalence or track changes in hidden hunger across space and time. Now, how do we get to capture that? The second point, or the second problem, is that we cannot discern the distribution of this hidden hunger. Where are these 2 billion situated, be it across geographies, be it across population segments, or specific micronutrients for that matter? Who, where, what, and why? These critical questions are key ingredients for intervention. And as I said, what you can't monitor, you can't mitigate. So whilst this estimate of 2 billion has certainly been compelling, it has, in essence, hamstrung us for those two problems that I cited. And this is precisely what prompted us at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, through our partnership with USAID Advancing Nutrition, and supported by an advisory group convened and supported by the Micronutrient Forum, and also collaborating with a group of eminent research partners across the globe to embark on this project. This is the first ever estimate of micronutrient deficiencies worldwide that uses multiple micronutrient biomarkers across the same individuals. We are pleased that this project has come to fruition, and we look forward to this launch of the findings today and our discussion of their implications. So I will note before I close that we are off track to meet SDGs, and by all indications, we are certainly backsliding. So without preempting the presentation of the findings, I will note that it is critically important that we increase our focus on transforming all systems, health, food, social protection, to better nourish populations and to do so equitably. Their opportunities abound. So my narrative is not all doom and gloom. We know what to do. Simple, cost-effective solutions exist, and we should double down on ensuring access, affordability, and desirability of nutrient-dense foods. We should also ensure the delivery of fortification, biofortification, and micronutrient supplementation so that we prevent and correct hidden hunger among vulnerable groups. But also opportunities exist in the current moment. The UN Food Systems Summit of last year emphasized food systems transformations, and many countries have committed to pathways that are relevant to their contexts. Earlier this year, African leaders launched the African Year of Nutrition, signaling commitments that we can build on. And last month, the White House convened a conference on hunger, nutrition, and health to catalyze the public and private sectors around a coordinated strategy to end hunger, improve nutrition, and close disparities. And as you participate today, I hope you consider this a call for action and see where you are situated in finding solutions to this issue. At GAIN, we most certainly do take this as a call for action. I am hopeful that a new era of food systems transformation, in which hidden hunger is afforded a position at the center stage, will empower national partners and groups such as those with whom I started my career in Zimbabwe. And without much further ado, I hand back the floor to the moderator, and I thank you. Over to you, Tanuja.
Thank you, Dr. Mbuya, for excellent opening remarks. Indeed, we are so thankful to the work of all the authors and organizations involved in this project, and of course, the support provided by the U.S. Agency for International Development and the Advancing Nutrition Project. Now, to start the panel discussion, I am so pleased to introduce a lead author of the Lancet report, Dr. Ty Beal, who is a research advisor in the knowledge leadership team at GAIN, where he generates evidence to guide programs and mobilize knowledge related to global nutrition and food systems. Ty works to understand what people eat and how it impacts their health and the planet. Ty will summarize the data of the new paper. Over to you, Ty. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanuja. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. And I'm going to focus on the key findings from the Lancet paper that was published last week. Other panelists will get into a lot of the solutions and discussion around it. So I'll be short and brief, but happy to answer any questions in the Q&A afterwards in the chat. Next slide, please. While I won't go into all of the methods here, I do want to just highlight a few key points. The first was highlighted by Mdu in the opening speaking. This really is the first ever analysis of global micronutrient deficiencies. There have been analyses that have focused on single nutrients such as vitamin A or anemia. However, we haven't really had any analysis before that has looked at the prevalence of any deficiency which really requires biomarkers, multiple biomarkers of different micronutrients among the same individuals. So for this reason, we did need to focus on two population groups: preschool-age children, those are children under 5 years of age; women of reproductive age, that's 15 to 49 years of age, due to the data availability. It's important to keep in mind that this is just 1/3 of the global population. There's another 2/3 of the global population that is not assessed in this study, for which we also see high prevalence of deficiencies in the limited data available. We focused our estimates on 6 nutrients. So we did estimates at the country level for 6 single nutrient deficiencies. These included iron, zinc, folate, vitamin A, vitamin B12, and vitamin D. Now the global estimate, where we estimate regional estimates and worldwide estimates for these two population groups, really focused on 3 core nutrients. For children, iron, zinc, and vitamin A, and for women, iron, zinc, and folate. I want to note that we use thresholds for deficiency that are really established in the field of global nutrition. These are the cutoffs or the thresholds that have the most consensus for use. We also adjusted for information using the latest evidence from the Brinda project. Next slide, please. This table just shows you the cutoffs that were used. Now, these are 6 different micronutrients, and some micronutrients have multiple biomarkers that we used. I won't spend much time on this slide. You can review this in the paper and further details in the paper. Next slide, please. Now, this is the high-level finding, and it's quite shocking. Half of children, 1 in 2 children worldwide, that includes countries of all income levels, 2 in 3 women of reproductive age have at least 1 micronutrient deficiency. Many of these children and women have multiple micronutrient deficiencies. Next slide, please. In certain countries, this prevalence can be as high as 9 in 10 women. This is the case in our data set in many countries in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Many of these populations had several micronutrient deficiencies coexisting within the same individuals. What might be really surprising to many people is that we didn't just see deficiencies in low and middle income countries. We saw this even in high income countries. So here we can see that 1 in 2 women in the UK have at least 1 deficiency. That's 1 in 3 women in the US. Iron deficiency alone is prevalent in 1 in 5 women in the US and the UK. Next slide, please. Now this slide is from the paper, and it really gets at some of the nuance in these deficiencies, as well as the overall prevalence for specific countries that have multiple micronutrient biomarkers measured in the same individuals. For children, we can see several countries, Cambodia, Cameroon, India, having prevalence upwards of 80% for at least 1 micronutrient deficiency. The different colors in these bars can represent the prevalence of deficiency of just 1 micronutrient, but you can see the gray bar shows that the prevalence of multiple deficiencies, that's 2 or more micronutrient deficiencies, can be up to 40% for children, as high as 70% for women in certain countries such as Pakistan. For women, you can also see some of these bars for total prevalence of any deficiency as high as 90%. This includes Cameroon, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and even other countries that had less and fewer biomarkers available showed similar prevalence. Next slide, please. Now this shows the global and regional prevalence. We can see that no country is below 45% for children or women. No region, no high income group is below 45%. Now this is very widespread. So we can see up to 80% for women in Sub-Saharan Africa, 74% in South Asia. This is 4 in 5, 3 in 4 women worldwide. No country, no region is untouched. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to finish with some key insights on the data. Again, we have 1 in 2 children, 2 in 3 women worldwide affected by these deficiencies. This can be up to 9 in 10 children in Pakistan, 8 in 10 in India and Cambodia being deficient in at least 1 nutrient. Several countries in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa have 9 in 10 women being deficient. These include Bangladesh, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, India, and Pakistan, among others. 1 in 2 women in the UK and 1 in 3 in the US are deficient in at least one micronutrient. Iron deficiency prevalence being prevalent among 1 in 5 women in both countries. In the UK, this is also prevalent for vitamin D and folate at around 20% each. So to conclude, we really see that this estimate of 2 billion people worldwide that was based on anemia, and it was from 30 years ago, is a major underestimate. When we look at women and children alone, we see 1.6 billion being affected by micronutrient deficiencies. It's more likely that the total number prevalence of people with micronutrient deficiencies is closer to about 1 in 2, or about half of the global population. That's about 4 billion people. So this is a huge issue, and I'm really thankful that the panel who follows will really get into some of the nuance in the discussion around how do we address this major issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ty, for those findings. Indeed, this is an enormous problem that's affecting vast amounts of the population worldwide. Now let's learn a little bit more about what does that mean for health. I'm so pleased to introduce Dr. Saskia Oostendorp, my boss, who is the executive director of the Micronutrient Forum, and also the co-founder, along with Gain, of the Standing Together for Nutrition Consortium. Dr. Oostendorp has over 25 years of research experience in nutrition in both the public and private sectors. She leads the forum in its mission as an international knowledge broker on micronutrient malnutrition. Over to Saskia. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Tanuja, for this nice introduction. And thank you to Ty for presenting these findings to us of this landmark publication, where, as was said before, for the first time, we now have reliable estimates in women of reproductive age and children alone, suggesting that 1.6 billion of women and children alone are micronutrient deficient, and that the global estimate in the total population is even much higher than we had anticipated before. So these findings were alarming, and they were they indicated that our estimates have been an underestimate for a long time. And this the implication for these billions of women and children are dire. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, it's because we know that micronutrient deficiencies in early life have irreversible, lifelong adverse effects on health and development, affecting the future of these women and children, their communities, and the society as a whole. And this is because micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals, they play such an essential role in many processes in our human body. Iron, iodine, and folic acid, for instance, are important for brain development and brain functioning. Zinc and vitamin D are important for physical growth. Vitamin A and zinc play a role in the immune system, and B vitamins and iron are important for energy production, whereas vitamin A is important for bone, skin, and eye health. So next slide, please. Micronutrient deficiencies really have profound impacts in all stages of the life cycle. During pregnancy, micronutrient deficiencies lead to adverse pregnancy outcomes, and they increase the risk of chronic diseases in children later in life. So they lead to more low birth weights, they lead to more pregnancy complications, they lead to, if severe enough, to more maternal deaths. And they increase the risk of chronic diseases in children that are born to micronutrient deficient mothers. And a recent study that was published last week by Nutrition International therefore indicated that scaling up antenatal micronutrient interventions, such as multiple micronutrient supplements or MMS, could lead to a reduction in deaths that are caused by nutrition-related non-communicable diseases. It could help prevent 6 million cases of hypertension and 3 million cases of diabetes. Now, micronutrient deficiencies during early life affect brain and cognitive development. And these children, therefore, later struggle in schools and as an adult have reduced economic productivity. Then micronutrient deficiencies in people also lead to more vulnerability to infectious diseases because of the effects that micronutrients have on the immune system. So even though the immediate impacts are less visible, the impacts of micronutrient deficiencies can impact the lives of an entire generation. And it's true what Madhu said in his opening remarks. It is a truly hidden form of hunger. And yet we do know what to do. Unlike some other nutrition and global development challenges, we do have a suite of highly cost-effective interventions available, but they require an integrated approach and a holistic approach where we need to improve the coverage, the quality, and the delivery of these cost-effective interventions across food, health, and social protection systems. So first of all, we need to ensure that everyone has access to these micronutrient-rich foods, such as animal source foods, green leafy vegetables, orange and red fruits and vegetables, beans and lentils. So in addition, our food system, of our health systems need to deliver these messages on the importance of dietary diversity. And they need to provide supplements to those that are in high needs, such as pregnant women or adolescent girls. Our food systems need to embrace diversity of production, and they need to deliver large-scale food fortification and invest in micronutrient-rich, climate-resilient food crops. This can be done through biofortification. Agricultural interventions are needed to improve the content of micronutrients in the soil. And then finally, social protection programs need to ensure equal access to nutritious foods and need to ensure that women and children are not left behind. We need to have an enabling policy and regulatory environment to embrace these holistic approaches. And as was said before, we need to invest in data for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. But it is not impossible to reach the global development goals because micronutrient deficiencies or micronutrient interventions are among the most cost-effective interventions that we have available. Because of the impact that it has on economic productivity, they give an average return on investment of 16 to 35, depending on the target geography. So investing in these micronutrient security is a smart thing to do for governments across the world. And this agenda is solvable, but it requires us to take action together. Now, one of the promising outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic was the emergence of new and dynamic forms of collaboration to tackle the many complex challenges that were caused by the pandemic. One such example of such a collaboration is the Standing Together for Nutrition Consortium that was set up to estimate the impact of the COVID pandemic on global on maternal and child malnutrition. And these consortia really confirmed that together we can be so much more powerful and we can accelerate progress far more than we can do alone. So together we can really achieve a future where hidden hunger no longer exists, and we can help build stronger futures for these 1.6 billion women and children around the world. Thank you very much. Over to you, Tanuja.
Thank you, Saskia. Thank you. Very inspiring. I am now pleased to introduce you to Nita Dalmia from UNICEF. Nita has over 20 years of experience in public health nutrition across Asia and Africa. She currently leads UNICEF's work on knowledge, advocacy, and partnerships in New York, where she is responsible for providing strategic and thought leadership on data, knowledge, partnerships, and governance for UNICEF's nutrition field programs. Nita will share insights on the importance of nourishing early child diets and on UNICEF's report, Fed to Fail, the Crisis of Children's Diets, and the actions that UNICEF are urgently recommending. Thank you, Nita. Over to you. And please continue to put your questions in the chat box.
Thank you so much, Tanuja, and good morning to everyone. Thank you also to the Micronutrient Forum and GAIN for organizing this important webinar. These updated estimates on micronutrient deficiencies are timely. Not only do they address important data gaps, but they also shed light on the crisis of children's diets and the nutrition services received by children around the world. And so today, I'm pleased to share with you some key highlights and recommendations from UNICEF's Fed to Fail report on the crisis of children's diets, which was published last year. I'm also pleased to share with you highlights from a UNICEF report released today on child food poverty. Together, these updated estimates, along with our research on children's diets, provide us with a strong foundation on which to advocate and support accelerated actions to improve diets, services, and practices for children. Next slide. Our findings show that young children around the world are being fed to fail and are deprived of the diets they need at the time in their life when it matters the most. These findings also show that good diets for young children are unavailable, inaccessible, and unaffordable to families across the world. And among children 6 to 23 months, about half of children are not fed the minimum recommended number of meals. And less than 1/3 of children are fed the minimally diverse diets they need to grow and develop. And the low consumption of nutritious foods is especially troubling, with about half of all children missing out on the benefits of foods such as fruits and vegetables, eggs, fish, or meat. And unfortunately, this situation of children's diets have seen little to no improvement in the last decade. Slide, please. And now COVID-19, conflict, and climate change has induced a global food and nutrition crisis and created more serious challenges for children. Across the 15 worst affected countries in the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and other hotspots, we estimate that in 2022, 8 million children are suffering from severe wasting, 27 million children are living in severe food insecurity, and 40 million children are affected by severe food poverty. Next slide. So at the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that UNICEF had just launched a new report on child food poverty. So what is child food poverty and how do we define it? It's the children's inability to access and consume a minimum diverse diet in early childhood. It's defined as the proportion of children under 5 years of age consuming foods and beverages from 4 or fewer of the 8 defined food groups. And we distinguish between moderate and severe child food poverty, with moderate food poverty defined as the proportion of children consuming diets with 3 to 4 of the 8 food groups, and severe child food poverty as the proportion of children consuming extremely poor food diets that include at most 2 food groups, often a cereal and perhaps some milk. So globally, 2 in 3 children, or 478 million children, are experiencing food poverty, while 1 in 3 children, or just over 200 million children, are experiencing severe food poverty. And together, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are home to nearly 2/3 of all children living in severe food poverty. Next slide, please. UNICEF's report is therefore calling for bolder actions and greater accountability to elevate the elimination of child food poverty. For far too long, children's diets have been tackled with fragmented actions that fail to reach most children. Our actions to improve children's diets must therefore focus on delivering adequate foods, services, and practices. And for this, governments must take the lead in elevating the elimination of child food poverty, especially severe child food poverty, to a national development priority and ensure coherent policies and programs across sectors and systems. Together with civil society, development partners, and the private sector, we must mobilize 3 key systems that have been mentioned before: the food, health, and social protection systems, to deliver better diets for young children everywhere, including in fragile and humanitarian settings. Next slide, please. The first 3 actions focus on transforming the food system by increasing the availability and the affordability of nutritious foods, including fruits, vegetables, eggs, fish, meat, and fortified foods, by incentivizing their production, distribution, and retailing, by implementing national standards and legislation to protect young children from unhealthy processed and ultra-processed foods and beverages and harmful marketing practices, and by using multiple communication channels, including digital media, to reach caregivers with information and advice on child feeding and increase the desirability of nutritious and safe foods. Next slide, please. The fourth and fifth actions are crucial to mobilize the full potential of the health system by expanding caregiver access to quality counseling and by investing in community-based counselors and health workers. By delivering dietary supplements, home fortificants, and fortified complementary foods to young children at risk of micronutrient deficiencies and anemia. Next slide. And the sixth and seventh actions focus on the social protection system through designing social transfers, cash, food, vouchers that support nutritious and safe diets in early childhood, including in fragile settings and in response to humanitarian crisis. Using social protection programs to improve caregivers' knowledge about young child feeding by providing education and counseling and by encouraging the use of health and nutrition services. Next slide. So I'll end this presentation by mentioning that all of these resources, UNICEF's Fed to Fail report and the Child Food Poverty report, can be accessed on UNICEF's website. Thank you again for your attention, and I look forward to responding to your questions. Over to you, Tanuja.
Thank you, Nita, for your work and UNICEF's global level guidance. Let us now shift to how nations are addressing hidden hunger. Our next panelist is Dr. Annabelle Bonvecchio Arenas, who is the Director of Research of Nutrition Policies and Programs at the National Institute of Public Health in Mexico. She has more than 20 years of experience in the design and evaluation of strategies and programs for the prevention of the triple burden of malnutrition, undernutrition, overweight, and obesity, and micronutrient deficiency. Anima will reflect on the study findings in Latin America and will provide insights and lessons learned from Mexico on large-scale implementation of a micronutrient program as part of social protection and health programs. She will deliver her remarks in Spanish, so we kindly ask that you check your interpretation box and select the appropriate language. Thank you, Annabelle, over to you.
Thank you, Tanuja. Buenos días a todas y todos. Muchas gracias al Micronutrient Forum y a GAIN por la invitación a compartir la experiencia de México en este webinar. Los resultados, next please. Los resultados del artículo de hoy nos muestran cómo el problema de las deficiencias de micronutrientes son un problema que se presenta a nivel global y en especial, más bien, también en países en la región como en la región de Latinoamérica, de pequeños y medianos ingresos. Perdón, de medianos y altos ingresos. Aquí podemos ver en el artículo cómo casi la mitad de nuestros niños y el 63% de las mujeres en edad reproductiva tienen alguna deficiencia de micronutrientes. Next, please. En Latinoamérica enfrentamos la triple carga de la mala nutrición. Muchos países tienen este problema creciente de sobrepeso y obesidad, pero a su vez seguimos presentando problemas remanentes de desnutrición y de deficiencia de micronutrientes, con un altísimo consumo de alimentos ultraprocesados en la mayoría de nuestros países. Y sabemos que el consumo de este tipo de productos y las ventas está relacionada con tanto el sobrepeso como la obesidad, así como las deficiencias de micronutrientes. Entonces es un gran problema que tenemos presente en la región. Next, please. En México, como en muchos otros países de Latinoamérica, la principal deficiencia que tenemos es la deficiencia de hierro, y como vimos en el artículo, disminuyó de 35 a 17% a lo largo de todo el periodo. La deficiencia de algún micronutrientes disminuyó de 58 a 28%. En mi presentación me voy a enfocar en el ejemplo para niños. La próxima, por favor. Esto puede atribuirse, esta disminución, a que tuvimos, next please, sorry, a que tuvimos por más de 20 años un programa de transferencias condicionadas para familias en condición de pobreza, el cual estaba condicionada a la atención a servicios de salud y nutrición de la población. Este se implementó inicialmente en comunidades rurales, posteriormente en el 2002 pasó también a comunidades urbanas y en el 2013 se llevó a escala nacional a más de 6.1 millones de familias. tenía un fuerte componente de nutrición y de entrega de suplementos que varió a lo largo de la vida del programa y nos mostró impacto en reducir la desnutrición crónica, la anemia, las deficiencias de micronutrientes, especialmente durante los primeros 15 años. Next, please. Durante estos 20 años tuvimos múltiples evaluaciones y estudios de implementación que nos permitieron ir retroalimentando el programa. Inicialmente se daba de suplementos, alimentos fortificados, bebidas para mujeres embarazadas y papillas para niños. Next, please. A lo largo de todos estos estudios y también con el cambio de la situación epidemiológica del país, con un incremento notable del sobrepeso y la obesidad, hicimos una serie de estudios partiendo de estudios de eficacia para probar el efecto de 3 diferentes micronutrientes, los alimentos fortificados, el jarabe y los micronutrientes en polvo. Y vimos cómo con los micronutrientes en polvo, bueno, con todos en general se disminuyó anemia, deficiencia de hierro y deficiencia de zinc. Con estudios adicionales que hicimos de aceptabilidad y también de costo, decidimos proponer el equipo pues, de investigación el cambio hacia micronutrientes en polvo para niños y los mismos estudios que hicimos también con mujeres embarazadas hacia tabletas para mujeres embarazadas. La próxima, por favor. También esto lo demostramos en Next, please, en estudios de efectividad, donde vimos, tanto en niños como en mujeres embarazadas, en 4 estados, un estudio a gran escala, que también teníamos impacto en disminuir anemia, deficiencia y deficiencias de hierro en niños en urbano y rural. La próxima, por favor. Next, please. Es por esto que en 2013 planteamos este cambio de esquema que ya les comenté, pero ahora contaba con 4 suplementos, 2 que fue propuesto por el equipo de investigación, las tabletas para mujeres embarazadas y los micronutrientes en polvo para niños, pero adicionalmente el programa decidió dejar la la papilla fortificada para los niños de 6 meses a 1 año y una leche fortificada para niños de 1 a 2 años. Next, please. Entonces, en todo este tiempo, pues muchas fortalezas y retos que comentar, me voy a enfocar por razones de tiempo en los más relevantes. En primer lugar, la alta demanda por ser un programa a nivel nacional, pues facilitó la manufactura local. Y eso hizo que el gobierno se apropiara mucho del programa y que contribuyera a la sostenibilidad. También el sistema de gobernanza con esta evaluación continua y esta interacción continua entre implementadores y evaluadores, la condicionalidad aumentó la atención a los servicios de salud y por lo tanto facilitaba la entrega del producto y esto logró que tuviéramos un impacto a gran escala. En cuanto a los retos, pues fueron muchos. A partir del 2012 vimos que disminuyó las mejoras en los diferentes desenlaces en nutrición y coincidimos los expertos en que esto se puede haber debido a la complejidad al escalar el programa pues, a 6.1 millones de familias, al esquema de suplementación complejo y a una falta de monitoreo y supervisión. Adicionalmente a los cambios que ha habido en la dieta con el alto consumo de alimentos ultraprocesados. Next, please. Ok. Entonces, dentro de las lecciones aprendidas, tenemos que los programas deben ser dinámicos a través de lo largo de su duración, sobre todo porque podría necesitar cambios no solo en el esquema de suplementación como sucedió, sino también probablemente en focalización, entre otros. Mantener los esquemas de suplementación lo más simple posible, ya comentamos sobre la complejidad del manejo de cuatro suplementos. Posicionar los suplementos como productos de alta calidad, debido a que, sobre todo en personal de salud y en la propia población objetivo para generar su demanda. Reducir, por supuesto, el consumo de alimentos ultraprocesados a la vez que se promueven dietas saludables dentro del propio programa. Y fortalecer el monitoreo y la supervisión que usualmente son subestimados, además de continuar con estudios de implementación que permitan la retroalimentación basada en la evidencia. A partir del 2019, desafortunadamente, se suspendió el programa. Estamos en el proceso de construcción de una nueva estrategia y espero que este artículo que nos presentan hoy realmente sirva de abogacía para terminar de convencer a los tomadores de decisiones de la necesidad de volver a tener un programa de suplementación con micronutrientes a la vez que combatimos el problema de sobrepeso y obesidad que tenemos presente en la mayoría de los países de la región. Muchísimas gracias. Over to you, Tanusha.
Thank you, Annabelle, for those excellent presentation from Mexico. Our next panelist is Dr. Jonathan Gorstein from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he serves as the Deputy Director of the Nutrition Team. He is also a clinical associate professor in the Department of Global Health at the University of Washington. His area of work focuses on the design and implementation of nutrition programs with experience in Nepal, Myanmar, and Indonesia, and focuses on capacity building, monitoring, and evaluation. Jonathan will provide an overview of the Foundation's nutrition strategy and the importance it places on micronutrient interventions and programs. Thank you, Jonathan. Over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Tanuja. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Thank you so much for providing us with the opportunity to participate in this really important event and provide the perspective of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. First of all, we congratulate the authors and everyone who's been involved with this work to generate updated estimates on the magnitude of vitamin and mineral deficiency. These data provide a real impression of the true burden of micronutrient deficiencies worldwide, which is essential in order to decide the most effective approaches to address them and ultimately to improve human health and human capital. At the very core of our work at the Foundation, we aim to support countries to improve access to affordable and nutritious diets as a step towards ensuring the nutritional well-being for all segments of society, including those who are most vulnerable. Our work spans efforts to improve micronutrient malnutrition through agriculture, food systems and biofortification, targeted interventions to mothers, infants, and young children, research and development, as well as traditional industrial fortification work. For all of this, we need really robust and accurate data on vitamin mineral deficiencies. The paper underscores the fact that there are only a few nationally representative surveys which are available to model global estimates, which are needed in order to inform policies and programs in countries. And where these surveys are available, they are 5 and even 10 years old. It's noteworthy that the situation in many countries may have actually become worse since the publication of this paper due to the global pandemic and increases in food prices and supply distributions resulting from the Ukraine war. We recognize that data collection on micronutrient deficiencies is invasive, time-consuming, and costly. But these persistent data gaps result in an incomplete view of the problem, which is a barrier to the design and implementation of effective micronutrient programs, let alone measuring impact. So we need to do better. At the Foundation, we're really trying to strengthen local decision makers and closing this gap by, first of all, generating consensus around new metrics and data that can help ensure that micronutrient interventions reach those who are most vulnerable, including the poor, women, and girls. This includes more granular and stratified data that amplifies where there are inequities within countries. And second, by making better use of existing data, such as through our funding of the World Food Programme's Modeling and Mapping Inadequate Micronutrient Intake Project, or MIMI, which is developing a novel proxy indicator of inadequate micronutrient intake using machine learning techniques and will display the results as interactive subnational maps. One of the things I really just want to acknowledge about this publication is that it brought together many different partners to achieve consensus on analytical methods, as well as the presentation and dissemination of results as one voice for the community. It's much better than having different estimates being generated by many different actors. We feel strongly that such collaboration and harmonization of efforts is imperative, and it's really the rationale for our investment in the Global Data Innovation Alliance, or DINA, which is hosted by the Micronutrient Forum, which convenes diverse partners to improve the availability, quality, accessibility, and use of data to support national level decision-making to optimize programs, resulting hopefully in more efficient and effective programs. We know that this paper will help us be even more strategic to set priorities, strengthen the data used to drive improvements of environmental deficiencies, and perhaps most importantly, understand the complementarity of different interventions as they come together in order to address micronutrient malnutrition. The previous presentation about the innovative approach to addressing micronutrient malnutrition in Mexico just shows how much we have to be nuanced in understanding what are the needs and the requirements in different segments of the population. Finally, I would just like to express my deepest appreciation and gratitude for this opportunity to contribute to this important webinar and stand ready to answer any questions. Thank you, and back to you, Tanuja. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. We are so pleased to hear about the depth of focus the Foundation has placed on micronutrient deficiencies and particularly on the important issue of data. My next speaker is Dr. Imorn Udom Kasmali, who is the Senior Advisor and former Director of the Institute of Nutrition at Mahidol University in Thailand. She is also an adjunct associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and a former member of the board of directors at the Micronutrient Forum. Her research focuses on micronutrients, efficacy of food-based interventions, maternal and child nutrition policy and programs. Imorn will share an overview on pro-micronutrient policy enabling environments, including examples from Asia. Thank you, Imorn. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Tanuja, and thanks to the organizer for inviting me. What I want to do in this short time is to reflect on 4 points. Look at the journey that pro-micronutrient policy has taken from the beginning. And it looks to me from what we are seeing, we have to revisit that scene. In the early years, micronutrient deficiency in low middle income countries has been connected to poverty, food insecurity, infection, and vulnerable life stage like children, pregnant and lactating women. So does that sound familiar to you from what you have heard? It seems that we have to take note of that is still going to come back to the scale. The combination of undernutrition and infection is indeed a deadly combination. And that has driven micronutrient to severity of scale. Now, the policy at that time is embedded, primarily linked in the health sector and connect to the maternal and child health. Now, what we are hearing today on the new global estimate is showing that micronutrient deficiency can also exist in the affluent society, where you have obesity, non-communicable disease as prevalent. So for the first time, I can see that micronutrient deficiency provide the opportunity to bring these two areas together so that we can join forces. There are so many things we can align. Many of the intervention and policy that can really shape both sides of the coin and become a win-win. For example, the healthy diet, which has been talked about already. The other things that has been talked about also has to do with all this policy is based on data. And it should be the data which is, of course, up to date and with quality. But the main thing is, have we been using it and optimize the use of what is there? So we are seeing an example of country case in Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, where the data comes from large-scale periodic national health, nutrition, and food consumption surveys. That has been compiled and synthesized to contribute to secure high-level policy commitment. For which one? For the 1,000 Day of Life movement. And that commitment come from either presidential or ministerial level. Now, under the 1,000 Day, if you unpack that from pregnancy to 2 years of life, the importance of micronutrient in antenatal care, particularly iron and folate, has been shown. And now, multiple micronutrient supplementation is being considered. And several countries last week met in Jakarta to discuss the potential to advocate that. Other program, importantly, the breastfeeding and also fill the micronutrient gaps in complementary feeding also fit in this 1,000 days. Now, Indonesia has placed a special focus on adolescent nutrition data and diet intake, and able to add adolescent as one of the priority under the presidential regulation. So it's like many of the evidence we are seeing at this point are pointing towards the first 8,000 days. And you may be interested in the World Food Program recent landscape report of micronutrient in Southeast Asia that came out in March. And that has really put this in a good light, that these 8,000 days, including the school-age children and adolescents, what does that bring to us? It leads us to the importance of school meals. Most of the countries in Southeast Asia have school meal program, and that could be capitalized by adding on others that would strengthen and also value-added micronutrient in that school meal. Also, nutrition education and school gardening could be a part of that. My third point has to do with the food base. Now that we talk about school meal, the food-based intervention to deliver micronutrient, the large-scale food fortification, biofortification in agriculture that has been mentioned, and of course, dietary diversification are key. Now, for this diversification of diet, the question is, who produce diversified diet? The statistics show that in the world and in Southeast Asia, the millions of smallholder farmers produce diverse food with 50% or more of key nutrients. There has been a recent review of the rice and fish integrated farming practice that can be adapted to context in Bangladesh, in Cambodia, Myanmar, and Vietnam that show the benefits to food and nutrition security, improved income, rural livelihoods, environmental friendly, and biodiversity conservation. So there are many things that we need to take a look and see how we can secure quality micronutrient-rich diet from the beginning. Transformation of food system to deliver healthy and sustainable diet should be really part of the things that the food-based intervention of micronutrient can join forces and be able to link that up to the goal. My last point in summary of this is that for pro-micronutrient policy enabling environment, first should be informed by evidence, and we are seeing that we need more data that are timely, of quality, coming from multisectoral, can be subnational or national level. Another thing is that the policy should be integrated across different sectors: agriculture, food, health, education, wash, social protection, and science and technology that are now playing a lot of role. So I think that that should be part of the integration. the key things to make the policy effective has to do with implementation research. To generate the knowledge how to improve implementation from policy to programs, and most importantly, practice. We need to strengthen the end of the line in order to create the difference. My really last final point is, should we still call micronutrient deficiency hidden hunger? I was wondering that because the more we talk about that, they look more visible to me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Imoran. That was a dynamic presentation from the political support prime ministers and presidents need to the role smallholder farmers and school feeding programs can play in the 8,000 days. That was very informative. I now want to open up the conversation to all our panelists. Participants have been putting in excellent questions into the chat, and we will now spotlight all the speakers for a Q&A session. So please, is everyone on now? Great. So the first question I'm going to have Ty, very simple question. We talk about micronutrient-rich diets. Ty, what are the foods and how do we address the affordability of these micronutrient-rich foods? Ty.
Yeah, that's a great question. So really the top sources of these nutrients are a mix of plant and animal source foods. Often lacking are animal source foods when you think about populations with poor access to a diversity of foods. So the most nutrient dense foods are organ meats, small fish, dark green leafy vegetables, bivalves, so these are clams, mussels, oysters, crustaceans or other types of shellfish. That includes shrimp, lobster, crab, etc. And then ruminant meat such as beef or goat, eggs, milk, and other products such as yogurt and cheese. And also from plant sources are pulses. So this is beans, peas, and lentils that are also a rich source. When you think about whole food sources and the affordability issue, animal source foods are often not affordable. So we can make efforts to improve the productivity, the efficiency, availability, and access to those foods. For the foods that are nutrient rich that are more affordable, these are dark green leafy vegetables, so spinach, kale, dark lettuces. Those are relatively affordable worldwide. And pulses, so beans and lentils, are often affordable as well. So I think improving access to these foods, we mentioned making these more bioavailable through processing them in certain ways, such as fermenting, soaking them, sprouting them, using biofortification to improve the nutrient density and resilience of those foods as well. So affordability is an issue, but we can address it through a package of services and programs.
Thank you, Ty. My next question is going to go to Nita at UNICEF. In the context of the global food crisis, which UNICEF is working night and day on currently, how can we keep the focus on micronutrient malnutrition?
Great question, Tanuja. So as I mentioned before, this is a complex crisis. And for responding to a complex crisis, we need to deploy multiple solutions. And the first one is to keep a focus on prevention. And for this, micronutrient interventions, including food fortification, food supplements, can play an important role in making sure that women and children don't shift from the moderate to the severe child food poverty, for example, that I mentioned, into the wasting category. And so these need to be scaled up, and we have the three systems that we have focused on, and all three systems are responsible for making sure that those preventive interventions are in place and are scaled up. At the same time, we do know that when prevention fails, these children, these women do need to be do need to receive life-saving treatment. And so, and those treatment can be for not just the wasting that happens, but also for key micronutrient deficiencies. So this may be women who need to be treated for anemia, for children in settings where scurvy and other types of micronutrient deficiencies are rampant. So in essence, it's going across both prevention and treatment. And then a focus, of course, on the youngest, the poorest, the most disadvantaged, for whom special measures need to be put in place using social protection systems. And for those, a few options are there, and they can be linked to the provision of cash and vouchers, which allow families to go out and afford some of the foods, some of the micronutrient foods that Ty just mentioned, and then link them to services where we know from the evidence base that the provision of social protection measures with services can help to improve nutrition outcomes, especially micronutrient outcomes for women and children. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita. I have two questions. I'm going to say the questions so that the speakers will know what's coming. First question is for Mdu. What are the health consequences of deficiencies, particularly in the context of high-income countries? And following that, I would like to direct a question to Annabelle. And how can we position micronutrient interventions in the forefront of the health and nutrition agenda of government policymakers in particular? First to Mdu.
Thank you for that question, Tanuja. I guess the short answer to that is that the health, survival, and economic effects of micronutrient deficiencies are similar regardless of population. And what differs really between high income and low or medium income countries is the magnitude of this effect, and therefore the visibility. And to ground this discussion or this comparison is the fact that fortification has its roots in the US and Switzerland, and this was in direct response to clinical symptoms of micronutrient deficiency. So this points towards this equalness in terms of the effects of deficiency. But I will link to more recent data to flesh out the narrative. There was a detailed analysis that was published in the Journal of Nutrition a month or two ago that showed that the prevalence of iron deficiency anemia is on the rise in the United States. And the reason that this analysis is illustrative of this point is that there are 4 additional trends that can give us an indication of possible drivers and also probable effects. And working backwards in terms of these trends, what the authors saw when they looked at a range of data from 1999 to 2018, I believe were the years, were first rising mortality rates that were related to iron deficiency anemia, and secondly, a rising prevalence of people with anemia in the US population, and thirdly, decreasing trends in the iron concentrations of food products, so reductions in iron, and then declining dietary intake of iron. So all of those trends, when you look at them in combination, really suggest that there is an issue and there are mortality effects that can be attributed to iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia specifically. So all of that to say, with that illustrative point, hidden hunger, hopefully emerging from the shadows per Imon's point, it is an issue in low and high income countries alike, although the burden is smaller in magnitude in high income countries, as Ty illustrated. So at the end of the day, it's important to be mindful of similarities in vulnerability and inequity, because those exist across all populations across the globe. So thank you for that question. I hope that sheds light to the issue.
Annabelle, please.
Yes, I'm going to change to Spanish if it's fine. I think it's an excellent question, es una excelente pregunta, y pienso que para los países como en Latinoamérica, donde presentamos esta doble carga o triple carga de la mala nutrición, realmente la agenda se ha volteado mucho a el problema de sobrepeso y obesidad, cuando sabemos que realmente son problemas que deben abordarse de forma simultánea, como lo vimos hoy a lo largo de todo el webinar. Creo que a lo largo del webinar hemos tenido excelentes argumentos para convencer a nuestros tomadores de decisiones que el problema de deficiencia de micronutrientes está presente incluso en estas poblaciones donde tenemos grandes cifras de sobrepeso y obesidad. Entonces creo que debe plantearse como un problema que debe abordarse de forma simultánea, que no es uno o es el otro, sino son ambos problemas, y sobre todo resaltando todas las implicaciones para la salud que se comentaron hoy, incluyendo lo que comentaba Saskia del impacto que tienen las enfermedades crónicas no transmisibles. Creo que ese va a ser un gran argumento para que los países que han volteado básicamente a ver el problema de sobrepeso y obesidad, ahora también vean que este sigue siendo un problema y que debemos abordarlo de forma simultánea, al igual que a través del enfoque de sistemas alimentarios. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle. I now would like to ask a question to Morn, which is, you have touched upon this already a little bit, but if you had to prioritize, in many lower and middle income countries, people consume very inadequate amounts of nutrient-dense foods, like fruits and vegetables. How do we overcome this challenge? What would you say are the priorities for action?
In the low middle income country, right?
Yes.
Am I hearing right?
Correct,
And the
yes.
fruit and vegetables. Well, that is one of the things that we have been discussing as well, that although it looks like we have abundant fruit and vegetable supply, but in our food, the perishable, and also how do you have to the transportation as well as behavior of consumer. It's important that we need to realign that towards fruit and vegetable in the meal nowadays. I have to say, comparison to the West, you eat salad bowl, the whole salad like that. Here, it's more decorative. So it's one of the things we have to take a look at, a more comprehensive look at how we can make it more available and more attractive. And to be able to do that, at the moment, there has been a campaign to take a look at some of the fruit and vegetables from the indigenous source that are available, but people ignore them, and to bring their values on board. And COVID-19 has brought that on board, that some of these fruit and vegetables that we have are full of nutrients that could be helpful to ward off the virus. And that, I would say, we need to bring something like that on board to capture more attention and also to make the message speak right to the consumer's interest.
Thank you, Morn. Now I have a question for Jonathan. He spoke so passionately about data. And so we have a question coming in. What can be done to improve micronutrient surveillance and ensure better and more regular access to micronutrient data? Jonathan?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's an extraordinarily important question. And I think that if this paper, well, the paper does a number of things, but one thing that it certainly does, and I think Eric Boy had mentioned this as well, is that there's a dearth of nationally representative data on micronutrient deficiencies. Many of the surveys are 5-10 years old, and we just don't have a lot of micronutrient prevalence data that are collected through household-based surveys. They're expensive, they're laborious, they take time, And if we can better leverage existing surveillance systems to be able to access panels of individuals, to be able to collect data from those individuals, we'll be able to really measure micronutrient status on a more ongoing basis. Not only does this provide us with better access to panels of individuals to collect specimens and understand what's going on, but it puts the ownership of a lot of those data directly into the hands of national stakeholders and to governments, which are already routinely collecting data through antenatal clinics, through health information systems. And if there's a way for us to be able to be more intentional to access those types of surveillance systems, collect biological specimens, analyze those for the micronutrient content, we could probably do a better job. Now, statistically, it is always optimal to be able to have a nationally representative survey through probabilistic sampling. However, we also need to understand that that often comes at a cost of not being able to have a large quantity of data. So no, it's a great question. I think that it was Naveen who put it in the chat, and I think that we can be doing a smarter and a better job of accessing individuals to be able to generate data on micronutrient prevalence and burden. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, speakers. I have one question for Saskia, which actually will be a great segue into the closing remarks. We are so pleased with this webinar, the tremendous interest, over 500 participants, and we thank you for your support and your interest. Saskia, the question is, we face a climate crisis as well as a malnutrition crisis. How do the recommendations of the Lancet report align with sustainable diet recommendations? For example, the diet recommendations of the E-Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, and Health. Over to you, and then you may continue to your closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tanuja, and that's a great question. And in fact, as the E-Lancet report also indicated, we need to move towards more sustainable and more nutritious food systems that can deliver foods that are both micronutrient rich, but also not are a threat to the environment. I think it's important to realize that the Eat Lancet series in their recommendations do include the need to consume small amounts of animal source food. So, but that means that in most countries and in many societies, people currently need to reduce their amounts of intakes of animal source foods because of the implications for environment and because of the risk for chronic diseases. Whereas in some other societies, people that are at risk of micronutrient deficiency still need to increase their risk of animal source foods. Now, in addition to that, there are a number of interventions that were also mentioned during the call today that are important across food systems and health systems, such as large-scale food fortification, such as biofortification, such as supplementation delivered through health systems that can all help to provide micronutrients when it is not possible for people to consume these nutrients from their diets, either for economical reasons or for environmental reasons. So I think in brief, these recommendations are not opposing the Eat Lancet recommendations. They're actually in line with what the Eat Lancet is recommending. And do you want me to move over to the closing remarks now?
Yes, thank you to all the speakers, and to your closing, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I also would like to thank everyone, all the panelists and speakers for their great contributions here today. And I would like to also thank GAIN and the Micronutrient Forum for this research and for organizing this webinar. And I would like to again thank USAID Advancing Nutrition for funding this important piece of work. But most importantly, I want to thank all of you who participated. It was a very lively discussion. There's a tremendous number of questions in the chat, and we would like to ensure you that if we have not been able to address these questions yet, we will do so in future. So we will keep them all. And please don't hesitate to contact us if you are, still have another burning question. So the data that were presented and discussed here today really points to an unfortunate truth. Micronutrient deficiency is a global problem, and it is a bigger problem than we had thought before. And we have not made sufficient progress so far. But as you've also heard, we have readily available, scalable, and impactful low-cost solutions that we can use to tackle this problem. Now, why haven't we made sufficient progress? There are several questions around this in the Q&A chat, and I think there are a couple of reasons for our lack of progress. First is we have not invested enough yet into these integrated, holistic approaches across food, health, and social protection systems that are needed. Second, there may be a prevention paradox. We haven't talked about iodine that much in this presentation, but one of our greatest public health successes of all times is the iodization of salt with iodine, which has reduced the prevalence of goiter and iodine deficiency disorders tremendously. But it has also led to the false belief that this problem does no longer exist and that future interventions are no longer required. So that's the prevention paradox. And then, it was mentioned several times, and the paper also highlighted the overall scarcity of data. And as with any public health challenge, data is critical for us to drive agendas forward and to make progress in reducing hidden hunger. So what was also mentioned several times is that it is important to realize that the data that were presented in this publication were from surveys that were done before 2020. And we know that since then, the world has changed. The world is now facing an accumulation of crises that has further weakened global food and nutrition security. So the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and conflicts have led to a surge in the number of people at risk of micronutrient deficiencies simply because they can no longer afford a healthy diet with nutritious foods that are rich in micronutrients. So new data also suggests that climate change is further adding to this challenge because elevated CO2 levels impact the micronutrient content of food crops, and they also reduce yield. So that is further limiting micronutrients that need it most. But we really want to end here with a message of hope. And our hope is that this publication is a game changer and will kickstart a new era and an agenda for nutrition where micronutrient security is central to our approach of building more sustainable systems that also nourish. And then, as we've heard today, these revised estimates offer a new call to action to redouble our efforts to address deficiencies. And to address this, I'm pleased to announce that the Micronutrient Forum will be having its 6th global conference, which will be themed Nutrition for Resilience, Ensuring Micronutrient Security in an Era of Complex Global Challenges next year. This is a very timely theme, as we have heard that millions of vulnerable communities worldwide are now being impacted by these crisis upon crisis. And the ability to protect, nourish, and prevent against poor nutrition and health is so critical. So we will be discussing and exploring the interdependence of micronutrient nutrition with the resilience of individuals, communities, and systems within the context of a world where crises are the new normal. We will discuss complex interactions and trade-offs between micronutrient status, micronutrient interventions, and the overlapping crises we face, recognizing that micronutrients are really at the heart of our efforts to thrive in a world of increasing shocks. And in addition to this important theme, the conference will also include our traditional 4 tracks, focusing on biology, efficacy and safety, implementation and effectiveness, and the enabling environment. So coming off from a record attendance of our 2020 virtual connected conference, our upcoming 6th global conference will be a hybrid event, and it will be our most affordable and accessible conference to date. Scheduled 1 year from now, from the 15th to the 20th of October 2023, the conference will have a full, high-quality virtual experience to ensure global access with an in-person component in The Hague, which is the city of international justice and human rights. And as we know, micronutrient security is a human right. So we will be issuing a save the date later this month and a call for abstracts later this year. And if you want to have more information on this conference, please sign up to our conference-specific mailing list, which is available now in the chat through the link. So to conclude, the issue of micronutrient deficiencies is a global issue, as we have seen, and it is persistent, but building micronutrient resilience is possible. There is really no reason why we should deprive billions of women and children around the world the right to good nutrition and the nutrients that they need to thrive and survive. We hope that the webinar today has provided insights on a way forward, and we look forward to continue to collaborate with all of you that are present here today, and because together we are able to go so much further. I would like to thank you very much for your attention and wish you a very pleasant day, and please stay in touch. Thank you.